Hello everyone and welcome to my little rundown on the teams that will be involved in the Perfect World Shanghai Major RMR Closed Qualifiers, of course. Looking for a trip to Shanghai to play against the best teams in the world. This is a tentative list, of course. I believe it has been confirmed by Perfect World on their Twitter accounts who's got the invite today, but obviously there could be some teams that pull out and maybe the next team behind could get invited. But yeah, I mean, obviously, I also think it's quite cool to maybe educate some people on some of the teams that have done amazing work in Tier 2 this year, and maybe even in Tier 3. And some of the individuals that could be very likely to pop up and surprise some people in these qualifiers. I've done a lot of commentary work over the last 5 years, and especially in 2024. I've had one of my busiest years in 2024, and for that I'm very grateful. And it gives me a lot of insight into the players and teams, of course, that you perhaps won't know much about and could see perform and pop themselves into that RMR. They're obviously, as I said, a lot of people are only interested in the majors, maybe the biggest S2 events like Katowice and Cologne, for example, and we know that Kato and Cologne are pretty much invite only via rankings. This is also invite only via rankings, via the Valve rankings, of course, but it goes a lot further down in those rankings. So I'm looking forward to this because there's a lot of players and teams here that I like very much, and let's get straight into it. And my first of these sort of 2 videos, obviously we'll do one video for one RMR Closed Qualifier and another video for the next RMR Closed Qualifier. My first one will be for RMR Closed Qualifier A that you can see right here. So I will focus on the non-favourites to begin with and then end off talking about the likes of ENCE, Bleed, and GamerLegion and Koi, for example. I think those are probably the 2 with the biggest name value, or the 4, sorry. I'll be alongside Monte too, with the biggest name value here. Probably the teams that people would expect to qualify. So let's talk about Sangal first, which is a pretty cool, very cool team. They've historically had Turkish rosters, Sangal. Historically, they had EU mixes recently, but I think that one of the main old Turkish rosters that people remember would be the one with Paz, Imor, and Major. So what's cool about this team is that, of course, we have 2 previously discarded Turkish players looking so good at the moment. Jota came from Eternal Fire Academy. He's actually my one to watch from this roster. Keep your eye on this kid. I think he's very good. He's very often the top of the FPL charts as well. He's a big grinder, and he's looking really good on this Sangal team. And of course, xFloud himself came from Eternal Fire themselves. And I always thought xFloud did really well on Eternal Fire, and actually didn't want him removed, as that was during a massive roster merry-go-round for Eternal Fire. But obviously, it proved to be the right decision when Wicadia came in and they went to truly more heights did that Eternal Fire team, and they really hit the ground running. Wicadia has been absolutely stunning. However, on this roster, xFloud has absolutely landed on his feet. Sangal right now are on a brilliant run. I think they missed out on the RMR itself, points-wise, by only a few points. So I consider them as one of my favourites, actually, for this closed qualifier. Youngstar might have one of the worst aliases in Pro CS, but he does a fantastic job for this team in some of the tougher anchor roles. Prone to overcooking, but, learning comes with time. And alongside IGL Linus, who of course bounced around many a Young Ninjas lineup before ending up here. Samey the Orpa, who played with Neo and Taz, I believe, in the organisation of Honoris, which they ran back in the day. And then Anonymo. These names are not really names you'd feel like would fit like a glove or have synergy at all, to be honest. But it looks like it really has. They won a Res Cup alongside a CCT, I believe, this year. And not many teams can actually boast that. And they're genuinely on hot form at the moment. They make playoffs consistently. Even when they get an invite to those sort of playoffs, they sometimes make a grand final. So I think Linus deserves a lot of credit for this team, but I also want to make a note for ex-Fnatic coach Jumpy, who has been with them for 5 months, and I think he's clearly found a great level out of this team. My second favourite from this group is actually going to be Bait. I love this Bait team. I've been massive enjoyers of them ever since they added Headtrick and NPL. Another team that has grabbed, I think, an online cup or 2 this year. Headtrick and NPL have revitalized this team. In the past, Bait have been so close to making a major. They were 2-0 in the Swiss stage of the RMR for Rio and for Paris, and failed to make it. this could be their time. This could be their time. NPL has absolutely been lights out numbers-wise. I mean, if you, he's my one to watch from this roster. And I think I'm not mistaken, he's IGLing as well. So, which makes it extra impressive. Maybe he's calling around himself a little bit, but it makes it extra impressive, no doubt. Head Trick has seemed revamped entirely, reaffirming that your time on NIP doesn't count. I think the main issue for this team for me is Essential. I've kind of coined him the Ukrainian Mzinho, of course, from Mongols. And Essential plays all the tough roles, all the anchor positions, at least most, at least to my knowledge. At least that's where I've watched him play. I think he very often entries as well, which can obviously be very volatile. He's 18. Bait is his first professional team, and he's looked a bit lost on occasion, but he's learning. And just like Mzinho, I think he has improved over the time in this team. Mzinho is now a very important part of the team, and he's not a liability anymore. And I think Essential can kind of fall under that group of learning his role, getting into positions where he can perform, and feeling comfortable. And for me, genuinely, I think Sangal and Bait could make the RMR itself through this closed qualifier very, very comfortably. I'm going to be curious, obviously, to see how Alex performs as well, because I think he's been actually a member of this team that has been fragging really well, which maybe some people wouldn't have expected. So you have reliability and experience of Captain Kurtka. You've got NPL, who's still young but is leading and is looking incredibly good individually. Head Trick has looked very decent. The only minus point is Essential, and if they have a decent level, I think they'll be fine, Bait, in this closed qualifier. Next one I want to talk about is Parivision. It's going to be a bit of a quick one because I don't really know where I put Parivision. Their name value of the roster indicates top 30 in the world, maybe even top 25, top 20. But they haven't really gotten anywhere near that yet. Jerry seems to have fallen out of favour in CIS, especially after his failure to get this team to work at all. So Alpha's been drafted in. And Alpha, of course, was a part of a couple of Sprout rosters before they collapsed. And then they stood in for Cloud9 during the EWC qualifiers. There's been a slight improvement, and they made a final of a CCT recently. I'm seeing the same Art Frost from Spirit, the Art Frost we know and love. And Patsy's actually been really good, fragging-wise, in the last couple of tournaments they've played. And, of course, they have decent pieces of Kickert and Belchanok, but they just don't seem to have any true consistency. Maybe they squeak a spot at the RMR, maybe they just get through, but this is going to be a tough RMR CQ, as you can see, with the likes of, ENCE, Bleed, GamerLegion, Monte, and Koi, of course I'll get onto a little bit later. Belchanok actually is a good point I think it's good for me to mention him. He'll be my one to watch on this team because he's a bit of a volatile player, I feel like. He can either play really well or really averagely. And when he plays well, it can be really well. So he's probably going to be the most unknown name from this team, Belchanok. So keep an eye on him for sure. Now, One Win's team looks really cool on paper, of course. They've just taken Hobbit, but they've been incredibly up and down. One thing I will say is that Latic seems to be maturing, and his flashiness and high numbers are becoming more regular compared to his time in Aurora. And of course, I kind of coined Latic the B-Tech Deco in a way, because I thought he was a lot worse than Deco and had not really found his stride yet. But he's playing a lot better recently, putting in some really good numbers. And the AWP is just looking as flashy as ever, which is flashy and flicky as ever, which is a great sign. Putting this alongside Buster, who maybe a lot of people will think is completely washed, but he's been genuinely impactful. And the Hobbit, of course, as I said, fresh from Cloud9, still able to frag. You have a great core here. Ryojin spent just under 4 years on ArcRed's roster, who are in RMR CQB, I believe. And he finally got his step up to this team. However, I would say he's only been doing okay. Ditto for Nilan. I've seen great flashes from Ryojin in the games I've casted, but sadly, I don't think this team is ready to make it just yet. Now, TSM, there's going to be a lot of well-known names here, but I'm not even going to put them under the, well-known org category, because they've kind of been nowhere. Of course, they made that EU roster. Didn't really work out for them at all. It was an absolute mess, to be honest. I think it's fair to say it was a nightmare. But what's cool to mention about this TSM is that it originally intended to include Config and Blame F in this roster revamp. And if they did, that would have been absolutely sick. But still, this team has great name value. But sadly, despite a fast start, consistency has been hard to come by. I'll be honest, I'm not sure if this edition has a future in the cutthroat world of CS in Tier 2 especially. Everyone across the board has decent numbers, but the important games to win to make that next step up to a top 30 team has been a step too far so far. Very, very up and down. I mean, like, you see some teams hit the ground running and get consistency. You look at the likes of Sangal and Bait, but TSM, even with the name value on this team, I haven't really seen it yet. Acor will obviously be the player probably to look for the most. Valder is the leader these days. I maybe think his style is a little bit outdated, perhaps. Xiphon is still a very raw talent, despite the fact he's been, fragging in teams like Copenhagen Flames for however long. Made a couple of major playoffs, of course, Xiphon. I think Xiphon and Acor are your players to watch here. And Nico actually does some pretty good work, numbers-wise, but I think this is going to be a step too far for them. Next team I'm going to go on to is going to be Sinners. And Sinners still have that well-known core from when they competed in the IEM Full RMR back in 2021, in the form of the old Mal's legend Oscar, of course, and Shock and B-Stick, who those two I think have spent more than 4.5 years on this organisation. Neofrag joined at the end of last year. We all know Neofrag has been a bit of a... we know what Neofrag's been like. But as is seemingly the case with him, he was out by May due to differences in the team's vision, whatever that means. Maybe you can read between the lines on that one. Since then, they've been trying new 4ths and 5ths, and it seems like they've stuck with Morisco and Mikey, the latter coming from Sinners Academy, and the former, of course, from the Czech edition of the Enterprise roster before they went to a Polish team, which we'll get onto in a minute. Current form is not good though, and I think Oscar, even though Oscar will look really good, and everyone will probably know Oscar if you follow Tier 1 Counter-Strike from back in even 2018. I think that's when he was really at his peak with that Mouse team. Oscar's 33 now. He'll still look very, very good, but I don't think they have the firepower overall to make it. Quickly touching on the Enterprise team as well, of course, I just mentioned them. They field a Polish team these days, which is in the entirety of the ex-Thunderflash roster. Friend actually has some really cool experience, by the way. He played with the old VP legends, Taz and Neo in Honoris once again, that I mentioned earlier, in 2021 to 2022. And last year, he played actually quite a lot with Snacks when he was plying his trade in Tier 2 with the Let Us Cook mix roster that actually provided some good results and actually upset Fnatic once in a CCT. Also, the one and only Tao, he played with VP back in 2018 to 2019, but of course that was during the addition of the legendary roster that was on its absolutely last legs. I think when they used Snatchy and Mihu alongside Snacks and Bialy. But other than that, a decent streak in lower tiers recently. They haven't shown much, and I don't expect them to, really. Now, BC.Game. Bloody BC.Game. Everyone knows of this org because of Joel, pretty much, and I don't need to go into that too much. You to understand much of what happened there. People will say BC.Game don't deserve to be here because they've gotten their Valve ranking off of Joel being on the team, and I get it. But as far as I understand, they will be able to compete with a new 5th. It's really a shame because this team actually had some good firepower, even excluding Joel, even though he was the main focal point of it, however legitimate that was. Lekro can still hit his tasty 1-digs that he's known for from way back when. Satsanita, of course, you'll know and love after his recent experience at the top level with Apex. And Anarchez, of course, has been a true journeyman in Tier 2 ever since Team Secret in 2019. Can truly come alive in important scenarios, which I think is really important for him. He was part of that Team Finest roster that beat Eternal Fire in the grand final of the Pinnacle Cup back in 2022. I think Prime Taps will be the most unknown name. He came from the lower tier German scene and was a big academy player for a while. And I think despite him being the most unknown, he actually has a lot of talent. I casted him a few times, and I actually think his first bullet aim is very, very good. I actually was a member of the broadcast team that casted the first map when Red Star replaced Joel on the infamous day of his banning. And he has recent experience of playing with Prime Taps in that failed 5W project where nobody got paid, I believe. But I'm not sure he'd want to rejoin them or not for this qualifier. I think BC.Game, they recently announced they're in the market for a new 5th. Obviously, they're looking for a new 5th to try and attend. If they do attend, it's going to be hard for them to do anything special after everything that's gone on with barely any practice, of course. So, yeah, I think don't expect much, even though there's a decent name value there. Unity will be a very unknown name to many people here. They have one of the next names for the Czech Slovakian scene, though, and perhaps even world scene. Mikey. Genuinely keep an eye on this guy. He's one of my ones to watch for this qualifier. I think he could be a lock for the future, in a future EU mix, where he could be surrounded by more experienced names, perhaps, with him as like the unknown star. The core of this team came from Isuba, an old Czech org. Bloggers probably was the most known from that team for his 3.5 year, I think it was 3.5 year stint on the team. And he was also had a very brief Wings Up stint when he went over to Asia, played in a very weird Wings Up mixed team. But yeah, Kafida spent a long time on eClot as well, who I'll get into now. And yeah, I think, again, very unlikely to do much, but just keep an eye on Mikey, because I really think he's got something about him. eClot's an interesting one, because they have the OGs, the Czech OGs of Diator and NBQ, who've been on the organisation for 3 years, and Forzy, of course, who at one point replaced Oscar on Sinners. I thought Forzy was the next big thing at the time, and a perfect replacement for Oscar, but it didn't work out. And he ended up benched for nearly 8 months, I believe, before getting another opportunity on Entropic. But that project with Tizian, of course, the old big player, completely fell through. He's been on eClot since the end of last year. And at 22, he's still got plenty of time to make a step up once again. I think Forzy's got a lot of talent, and he's definitely one to keep an eye on. One thing I will say is that name value here is not great for eClot. They do have Kriaz, and he's actually a cool name on this roster. He's been around for a very long time now. He's played on a couple of very cool rosters, nostalgic rosters from the past, which I'll just read you out now, which I think maybe some people might remember. He played on Apex in 2021 with Dennis. He played on the finest team that I mentioned with Anarches that they won that Pinnacle Cup with. And he also played on the Simon Gaming roster that composed of Neeland, Norbert, Mo, and Kios back in the day. And perhaps actually most notably played on Epsilon back in the day, back in 2019, 5 years ago now. Good God. 5 years. That had Brokey, Crucial, and Surreal playing on it, of course. So yeah, I think he's got some pretty good experience. Blitz is a Romanian player that I thought looked great when he was on one of those Let Us Cook teams that Snacks, I said, was leading earlier. But his relevance has been a little bit lower of late, so I don't expect much from eClot. Could be an upset win. Like some of these matchups here, for example, I think they could do pretty well against. Maybe they could nab a couple of series, but somehow I doubt it. Now, the last of the unknown names in my books, Rhyno. Now, they're the next Portuguese team on the come-up, pretty much. They're kind of taken over from FTW in that sense. And it's fair to say that every single player on this roster is an unknown. As for a good reason, they've yet to even prove themselves in a CCT playoffs really yet. I don't think they've really got to that point. However, casting them once before, there are a couple of names that deserve mentioning. They're AWP IGL, who I could genuinely easily see improve and maybe even find themselves a spot on like a Koi or a Saw one day. Is Snappy, and he's actually, I think he's got something about him for sure. Overall, though, like it would take Mopos or Materis maybe to retire one day, maybe fill in those 2 slots. The fact he isn't AWP IGL might make him very sought after, of course, but we'll have to see. They have a very, very young rifler core. Average age over the whole team is 20, and Tim KJ, Crazy, and Agile. There's some good firepower there. I've seen some good stuff out of those guys, but they have no results to really back up their form at the moment. And there's a future here for Portuguese Counter-Strike that could be looked at for a premium org like Saw. But other than that, that's really, for me, all I can really say for them at the moment. But anyway, it's now time to kind of touch on the more well-known teams in this qualifier who I really think could be in for a bit of a struggle. First one I really want to talk about is ENCE. They're not there at all yet. This is why I kind of picked out the unknowns first, like Sangal and Bait, because I really think that they have a really good chance to make it, and maybe even comfortably as well. Despite my love for SDY and the Goofy and Kylar sort of ENCE/9 core, of course, that did so well last year, I think Glaive Squad might only just squeak in to the RMR itself, and perhaps even not at all. I believe in their floor level, but I also don't, in a way. It's like a ditto for Big, in my opinion, very similar to Big. I feel like a bit of a nothing team at the moment. I like the addition of Poddy because obviously it flies the flag for, you know, a Finnish player on a Finnish organisation. And I think they actually do a lot of great work. He actually does quite a lot of great work, and he's looked pretty assertive and decent in the clutch. But I don't know. I don't feel this ENCE team at the moment. I feel like they could be one of those that gets upset and could go home early, surprisingly. Next one, obviously, that deserves to be spoken about a lot is Bleed. And even though they have the name value and prestige with Kassad as the coach, which is obviously why I put them in the, you know, the more well-known expected teams to qualify section below all the others, I still consider them a tier 2 team. And maybe tier 1.5 at an absolute push, but I'm not sure if they're there yet. Experience and synergy is building with how much they played this year, and adding Nexa obviously makes a certain amount of sense. He's in similar CT roles, I believe, to what he played on G2, so you know, don't expect good numbers, even though he's dropped down a level. Excuse me. So that's the main problem. I think Nexa still looks a little bit rusty on occasion, but if he's there, even if he just has a good floor, he can get like 10 kills, 10 deaths. He can have games like that if the likes of Nork and Jacob play really well. And of course, most people will know every single player on this team. Nork and Jacob, I think, have been unbelievable. And it's fair to say as well that when Hampus has a good game, this Bleed roster can look really, really good. But again, it can often rely on the two Swedes, Hampus and Nork. Jacob is still really consistent even now. As I said, he's come on he's getting on a bit now, Jacob. But I think for me, I've always coined Jacob as probably one of the most underrated players in genuinely CSGO/CS2 history. He's been so consistent. And for that reason, I do think Bleed will make it, but it might be a bit wobbly. Cypher, of course, is also, I love Cypher, UK bias and all that, but you know, he's put up some great numbers online, but occasionally they still fall foul, getting lost in the source, like mid-rounds and stuff. And I've seen them getting caught in a couple of online matches of theirs, which could be a bit of a problem for them. But yeah, I think, to be fair, there's definitely, I feel like they should do well. I would definitely put them to qualify for sure. I kind of see them at the same level of the likes of maybe a Sangal and a Bait, because obviously, you know, Bleed also have some good LAN experience as well. Now, GamerLegion. I like this GamerLegion team a lot. I think actually for me, they might be one of my safest picks, which I know is a bit of a surprise maybe to many. But for me, ZTR was the perfect pickup to replace Snacks in my eyes. A young IGL to lead a young team with the experience of Ash, of course, at the helm. I really do respect Ash for what he's done with this team over the last couple of years. I trust him a lot. No UK bias, of course. And they were my pick in a mini interview I did with BO3GG as my underdog that can deliver for the rest of 2024. I think the duo of Andu, who came from GamerLegion Academy, and Flamus, who came from Namiga, can be absolutely brilliant. And with Volt's reliability and Slend looking more comfortable in bigger games on the AWP, I think they should be safe. And yeah, I think a lot of people know about this team, so I hope they'll be safe and they should make it. Last two from RMR CQA to talk about, and we'll start off with Monte. And, you know, Monte's new Polish core has very often been obviously a step above quality-wise in terms of the CCT games they've played. Sometimes they've absolutely destroyed people. But sometimes you can tell that their synergy is just not absolutely there just yet, which, you know, incidentally kind of makes Liquid looking so good with JKS and Ultimate out of almost nowhere, pretty much. You know, all the more impressive. They've been grinding, and even during the cast eye test, I feel like that step above in quality has kind of been obvious. But they aren't there yet. Anubis looked like to be a brilliant map for them at the beginning of their run, but they've had some poor losses on it since a nice streak to start. And one thing that's been notable is Sticko is very willing to take map control on T side, sometimes borderline recklessly, but that is opening up opportunities across maps they play. And I think the most important thing to note from this team right now is Hades. His individual form has still been very, very good, despite the fact Hades is IGLing now. Yes, Hades is now an AWP IGL for this Monte roster, and I like them a lot. I like him a lot. I think he can do great work. Put that alongside the fact that D here seems to have recovered some numbers due to after his sort of low form ENCE run. Krasnal and Demka can provide high floor impact as well. This is a very, very dangerous team. But I would not be surprised to see them caught off guard and not make it either. Looking at the quality of the other teams in this group, I think they should be fine. Like, if I was to pick 8 right now, I'd put them in that 8, and I'll get to that at the end, of course. But, of course, Sticker is just coming off the back of a surgery as well, so I hope he's well. Hope he feels well. And is ready to go. Last team in this particular bracket that I've kind of put these teams in right now is Koi. And while I think that this roster could possibly sneak qualification again, this roster right now just doesn't inspire me in the slightest. I have a feeling like this could be one of the things I'm going to stick my neck out with. I think this might be the last run for their roster. And the main reason I think this is kind of just basically recency bias. Some of the games I've seen from them in ESL Challenger League have been, this season, been very up and down. Especially poor losses to Z10 and Sashi. Well, don't get me wrong, they're good teams, which I'll discuss in my RMR Closed Qualifier B video. But I think this is why they've kind of been overtaken a little bit at this level of Counter-Strike. And they have I would say they have a relatively easy RMR compared to maybe the other one, actually. So maybe they sneak in, but, I could see them losing to a 1-win. I could see them even losing to a TSM if TSM have a good day. Even Parivision, and I could definitely see them losing to Sangal, Bait, and Bleed. So, yeah, it's a really tough one to call, but I'm actually going to stick my neck out and say if they make the RMR, it'll only be just, and maybe not at all. Anyway, now I need to pick my 8 that make it. And, I think for me that I would probably pick the obvious ones to make it. But I would actually, in terms of who I think will look the easiest to make it, I'm actually going to pick Sangal and Bait. They're my absolute favourites for this particular closed qualifier. I'll put Bleed just behind them. Maybe equal with Bait, maybe just above Bait. It's very, very close for me in my sort of my mind. So you've got Sangal, Bait, Bleed. I think they will make it. I think ENCE should make it. I mean, I have to pick them, really. So that's 4 out of 8. Then I'm going to pick Monte, who I've just spoken about, and GamerLegion. I'm actually going to pick the 2 left that I'm going to pick. This is off the cuff, complete just an eye test and from my heart. I'm going to pick 1-win because they have something about them. They just have very, very up and down performances. And I'm going to go for... I'm actually going to go for Koi, but they might just sneak in 3-2. If they're going to not make it in, I think TSM could easily upset them on their day. Even Parivision right now, I think Parivision might have a chance with the name value they have and the experience they have, especially with Patsy and Artfrost. So those are going to be my picks. But for now, thank you very much for watching. I hope I've opened your eyes slightly to RMR CQB, and stay tuned for the next video for RMR Closed Qualifier B, of course, as this was RMR Closed Qualifier A. Thank you, everyone.